Hey, sheepdog. So I wanted to share something with you that I think could be a blessing. And so if you found this because you are in law enforcement and you're trying to raise stepchildren or anything like that, maybe this will bless you. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Paul Buckner. I am a police officer and a chaplain in the central United States, the American Midwest. And a lot of the things that I talk about when I'm talking to officers about life, about how to be the best version of ourselves that we can be as officers and husbands and fathers and wives and mothers, comes from some pretty painful personal experience. And so I was talking to a young man the other day. You know who you are, buddy. And as we were visiting on the phone, he is going to be popping the question to a young lady that I think was made for him. And when he does so, he's going to be marrying a gal who already has a child. He has no children. And so there's going to be a lot of dynamics there. Fortunately, they've both been in relationships before. It's not their first time. I find sometimes it can be difficult for someone if you've never been married and they have. There's ground that they've covered that maybe you haven't. But specifically talking about stepchildren. And he's like, I know it can be a challenge. I certainly went through a lot of challenges, and I'm not afraid to share about some of those challenges and things that happen. And so it's one of those things that when you come into a relationship and you have stepchildren, there's dynamics that are not really present if it's not your. If I'm saying this poorly, so if you marry someone and you have the child together, the dynamics are different. It's easier if you do it that way. There's still challenges of how you're going to raise the child and discipline them, but it's different if there are stepchildren involved, especially if the other former spouse or the child's parent is still involved. It can add challenges and dynamics. And so he and I were talking, and I'm prayerfully thinking about how do I share with him in such a way that it will make sense. He's a seasoned officer, and I said, you have to think of your stepchild as kind of like responding to a mutual aid call. It's not your jurisdiction, and any authority you have really is delegated. You're there as backup. You're not primary. And I've talked about this before with relationships when it comes to whether you're cooking a meal. You develop roles within your relationship where one of you is primary and the other is backup. You're there to help. And in this case, imagine that you've responded to the scene of something. It's mutual aid. You're helping another department. It's not your jurisdiction. And in some cases, you don't know a lot of the dynamics. Raising stepchildren is a lot like that, because typically you have a strong disciplinarian in one parent and not in another, or in one spouse and not in the other. And so you can end up with some unusual dynamics. And sometimes if you marry somebody who is not a strong disciplinarian, and it's hard for them to do that, you can end up where they're like, hey, I just want to delegate this to you. It's not your jurisdiction. And so you will oftentimes, unless you're very, very fortunate, and very, very, very seldom have I ever come across a relationship where the stepkids adored the new stepdad or the new stepmom out the gate. It took years in my relationship for especially my oldest stepdaughter to tolerate me, and now we have a loving relationship. And it definitely can be a challenge, and I've never had to be a stepchild. Many of you have. There's definitely challenges on both sides of it. And if you can take a step back and you can be back up and let the other spouse be primary, it's better, because in some cases you end up in situations where the child's biological parent that you're married to will unintentionally or intentionally undermine you after they've delegated that authority. It becomes a problem, and it can become an enormous rub in a relationship that doesn't need to be there. If you've ever heard me talk, you've heard me talk about the 3 big marriage killers, which are adultery, pretty pass-fail, easy enough to prevent. Don't be saying and doing things that you shouldn't be towards someone that you're not married to. Devote yourself to your spouse. And secondly, is finances, getting a handle, something like Dave Ramsey, getting a handle on your finances and owning that. And then thirdly is how you're going to raise your children. And once you've been battle scarred from other relationships. You can end up, my wife and I talk about, like, we were shadow boxing in our early marriage against each other, but it really wasn't against each other. It was against others that had come before. You know, we both had been married before, and one of us had loved and lost a spouse, the other one had been divorced, and it's all kinds of muddy, messy. And so you can end up with unusual dynamics. And when you figure out how to conquer adultery, marriage, money in marriage, and how to raise your children, it is the three biggest hurdles that you'll face, the three big giants that you'll face in your marriage. And if you can tame them, defeat them, you're in good shape. And so going back to the concept of the one spouse being primary, if you think of it that way, and you know, when you drive through a city that's not your city and you see something going on, it can be hard. But I've literally got cops that are like, not my jurisdiction, not my circus, not my monkeys. And you're not going to be initiating traffic stops in a city that's not your jurisdiction. You're not going to be arresting people in a city that's not your jurisdiction. Take that one step further, back to the analogy of having stepchildren. It's best in an environment like that if one of your kids is on probation, if one of your kids is in trouble or whatever, or doing something outside of what the agreed upon relationship is, to bring in the person whose jurisdiction it is, and they need to be primary. And over the time that my wife and I have been married, almost 20 years now, she is a lot stronger disciplinarian, but she envelops with her love, and you don't escape it. She's like, I love you too much to let you get away with this. And I was very black and white early in our marriage, and I was much more like a hammer and direct about, you're wrong, stop it, here's your punishment. And I'm much more, I guess, like a rubber hammer, you know. And now I've got a grandson, and so I get the blessings that come with that. So if you can think about it in those terms and realize, hey, this isn't my jurisdiction, I'm here by request, because it can actually be one of the biggest marriage killers. And unfortunately, a lot of us, the second and third time around, my wife and I were fortunate enough to tame this beast, and I'll talk a little bit about why and how, but we were able to tame this beast, and we beat the odds. The odds are that your second marriage will fail. And so and a lot of the divorces that are out there, one of the reasons the divorce rate is so high is people divorce again and again and again. So you have repeat offenders and folks that have done it many, many times. And that's very common within the law enforcement community. There's no recrimination there from me towards anyone. One of my best friends has been married 6 times. But when we learn to do it right, and for me, that's a relationship with the Lord, that's being in church, that's a lot of forgiveness towards my spouse. She is never going to be perfect, and trust me, yours truly ain't even remotely perfect, and I never will be. And you know, there's always going to be little things that I will do or she will do that might annoy the other, but we need to look at that as being, hey, this is who this person is, and I accept them for who they are. And then secondly, I cannot highly recommend enough. There's a DVD set, there's books by Mark Gungor, Gungor. He's a pastor, and I count him as a friend and a mentor when it comes to marriage. And I've spent a lot of time learning from him, not directly, but indirectly, in the form of his DVD box set. It's called Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage. And he's got other books and materials out there. And that literally completely changed my marriage. And because we weren't going to get a divorce, but there was a lot of heartache, and it was like, man, where's the manual on this thing? We can't seem to get this thing figured out. So we went to one of his Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage conferences. It blessed us. I actually have an interview with him that I did. You can look up Beside the Badge, and then interview with Mark Gungor, Gungor, and check that out. So he makes a lot of great points. So as always, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you. I ask that God would bend the bullets around you, that he would protect your foot, that you wouldn't stumble, that you would not dash your foot against a stone, meaning you wouldn't even stub your toe. God bless. Be safe.